Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Goodstein, and this week on the Digital Leader Show, we're discussing: is the American corporation doomed? How big tech's era of invincibility may be over, and the tug of war over user data, as well as other headlines from our DEI Weekly, to curated selection of our favorite content for global digital leaders, and it goes out each week to members, and you can sign up at DEInetwork.com. Our goal each week is to discuss some of the key issues at the news and the news at the intersection of business, technology, and the humanities, in hopes of making you a better digital leader as we all transform into digital enterprises and a fully digital society. Live each Wednesday at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific, 6 p.m. Central European Time on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And the recording's available on major podcast platforms the following week. I'm Dan Goodstein. I head up the Digital Enterprise Institute, as well as the Institute for Robotic Process Automation and Artificial Intelligence. My co-host, as always, is Carlos Alvarenga. Carlos, say hello to the people.
Dan, good to see you again. Nice to be back, as always.
Carlos, give everybody a little of your background in case it's their first show watching with us. And I also wanted to let everybody know about the DEI review that's gone out this week.
So Dan, of course, Carlos Alvarenga, Chief Research Officer at DEI. I'm also an author, a new book coming out next year on persuasion and how persuasion works in all forms of communication. I'm also in the faculty at the University of Maryland and at Georgetown University. Before that, was a longtime management consulting guy, recovering management consulting partner, as I always say, and transitioned now into writing and research full time.
Great. So, Carlos, before we jump into our topics today, last week we launched our first DEI review. And for anybody who has been watching, we talk a lot about the DEI Weekly newsletter that goes out to our members. How is the DEI review different?
Yeah, the DEI review is very different, Dan, because it's a journal of journals. I call it a digital journal, right? It's our attempt to bring normally not accessible or difficult to access content, which is peer-reviewed business research. And most executives don't get a chance to see this, either because it's behind paywalls, it's because it's very technical work. Some of these papers can be 70, 80, even 100 pages long. So what the review does is to pick a selection. I think there's 7 different research projects, and then provides a quick, accessible, clear summary of the research, why these professors sometimes spent 2 or 3 years looking into this issue, what were the key findings, why is it relevant to executives, certainly in digital transformation, but really in any leadership role. So the review is a one-of-a-kind, I think first of its kind, attempt to bring hardcore peer-reviewed research from the best research centers in the world into the hands of working executives.
Yeah. No, great stuff. I'm really pumped, Carlos. I always get excited, when we have our Wednesdays, when we have our show, and in prepping for today. But I'm really kind of pumped about this week's stuff, because there's just a lot of exciting stuff happening in the world of tech right now. Stock prices all over the place. A lot of people, concerned about the economic conditions. Elon Musk breaking the internet every time he says something, and the meta meltdown that seems to be maybe indicative of a bigger problem. But there's a couple things that jumped out to me as kind of concerns or maybe flags that people should be looking at, right? So Bloomberg had an article called Meta's Meltdown, and talking about is this the end of big tech's invincible era? It used to be that the what was commonly known as FANG was kind of a safe bet, right? I know you spent some time in the market for kind of growth and safety, but you look at some of these numbers. Meta's down 50% since 2015.
70% this year, right?
And 70% this year, compared to S&P, has been up 45% in that period. But yeah, you're right. They're Facebook's down 72%, Snap's down 79%. And the FANG represents like 13% of the S&P. So is this the end of an era, or is this just kind of normal cyclical kind of factors?
Personally, I think it is an era. If we get Facebook is almost 20 years old, but as a company, and it's never had layoffs, but sooner or later it kind of happens to everybody. And I think of that tremendous wave of growth that we had right from this next second generation, right, of tech companies seems to be, at least on the innovation side, right, unless something dramatically changes, kind of coming to its close. We see Apple doing great, but sort of the last big hit product from Apple was the watch, right? And it's an incremental kind of thing. It wasn't, this remarkable breakthrough like the iPhone was. So I think Amazon continues, right? The model is simply, run and make it better. So we're probably getting to the end of that second wave of tech innovation, and the leading, I guess, sort of poster company for that is Meta. Now, the only thing that changes it is if this metaverse investment, which the shareholders don't seem to like very much, and it's causing a lot of the pain at the company, somehow in 3 to 5 years turns out to be a revolutionary thing. As of right now, I guess the market just isn't seeing it.
Yeah, and I think part of it is back to that issue of future innovation versus quarterly profit, and it makes you wonder, how much of how much of the issues are really about the needs of public companies to disclose and to show near term profits to shareholders versus the bigger mission, at least I think, has how Zuckerberg would refer to it. But it brings up the other question that I wanted to talk to you about, which is just the broader issue of the American corporation as we know it, right? I mean, you look at some of these numbers. I saw something in this article from Michigan, Michigan Ross, and they were talking about the number of actual public corporations has gone significantly down over the last I forget what period of time they were looking at, but down to the point where one of the people in that's quoted in this article from Michigan Ross said, the S&P 500 is represented, 25% of the S&P 500 is 5 tech firms, and a quarter of those are owned by 3 investment firms. So it seems to me like there may be a trend here, and it makes you kind of wonder, is that good, and why is that happening?
Well, I think I hear 2 things right there. And back to the question of Meta, there's been this debate, right, in the sort of philosophical side of Silicon Valley over the last few years around what are we all doing, which is sort of in a nutshell, right? And what are we making, right, in the parlance of the valley, and what problem are we solving? And I contrast this with the article in The Economist from last week about how we're going to miss the 1.5C target reduction, right? So, and the article lays out, look, it would take billions of investment and a remarkable quote unquote right moonshot to keep within 2C. So now you say to yourself, okay, well, what are the priorities, right? We've got the center of global tech innovation making us a headset so we don't have to go to work. In the meantime, all these things that the economists say that have to be invented, problems have to be solved, right, to keep us alive, right, as a species on Earth, are sort of not getting the investment, the attention that we need. So what if tech is using up billions and billions, right, of venture money, of corporate money, institutional money, to do what exactly? This is the thing I always ask the people who are out there who I know, is what are you making? You're all makers, right? So what are you making for society? What big problem are you solving? Because we see a whole bunch of other things that don't seem to be kind of what you're focused on. Do we need another app that I can dance to? Well, not me, but someone can record a video. So we have 3 of them today, right? So how many dancing video apps does the world need? While in the meantime, the climate issues continue to get worse. The other issue you bring up is the question of public corporations, because even then it's misleading. For 10 years now, we've had this movement to the institutionalization of ownership, right? So most corporations, even the ones that are quote unquote public, are owned by institutions, not individual investors. So the age of that the big companies are owned, by average Americans, quote unquote, that's long gone, right? So even there, you might say, okay, by proxy, because these are big funds, and maybe you say second to two, 2 or 3 degrees removed, I'm an individual shareholder. But the reality is that the big funds are the ones that own public companies, and the ones that aren't public are owned by, right, private investors and hedge funds.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point I hadn't thought about from a kind of individual investing standpoint. From the corporation standpoint, I just wonder, and a lot of this, is talked about in this podcast from Michigan Ross. But I just wonder if the benefits to being a public corporation aren't what they used to be, and don't outweigh the negatives, right? I mean, it's a lot of complexity to be a big public corporation. It's expensive. There's a lot of disclosures that you may or may not want to have to disclose if you're in the business of innovation, for example. There's issues around there's more federal scrutiny, right? A lot of the SEC types of things are federal regulations and things that don't exist at a state level, where a lot of these private corporations are incorporated, or I think all the companies are incorporated. So there's a lot of kind of negatives, and then the benefits seem to, it used to be when you were trying to build a railroad or major infrastructure, you needed a lot of investment, right? And now you have companies like Zoom and Uber that they have like 1% of the workforce that their older competitors have. So what's the benefit in actually being public versus private, especially when you have these conversations where the time will tell whether Zuckerberg is right or not. But when you have shareholders up your what every quarter who don't get the big picture, don't get the big vision of what you want to create, it makes you wonder. It makes you see maybe why this idea of private funding is maybe better for a lot of these companies.
Well, there were the goods, like you said, right? The classic corporation on the pro side were that, hey, you had access to capital. Now that's not an issue anymore, because there's so much private capital and so much wealth that's available to a company that you don't have to tap, right, small shareholders for that. There was an argument that was made for governance, right? That public companies were better run because of the transparency. That was considered a positive thing at one point. And there was a kind of social good that in a capitalist country, an average person owns shares, right? You participate in the economy kind of in that way. You're not just an observer. But you're right. I think a lot of the benefits are being solved in a different way. And the argument for why ordinary Americans, quote unquote, right, should own shares, I don't hear that made anymore. At least I don't come across it, right? I can't remember the last time somebody wrote an article that said, hey, listen, everybody should be shareholders in something. So that argument is gone. And in the meantime, what you've got is social pressure, right? Because if you're a public company, what you are facing is somebody, I don't like this and I don't like that. And I'm thinking about this today, because it's election results day.
Yeah.
You look at these remarkable maps, right? And you have like New York State, where you have these little pockets of blue. You know where they are, right? Because they're going to be cities. And the rest of the state is red. And you say these people all go to work at the same company in many cases, right? It's just how long is it going to be before these fissures, right, that you see outside the office door begin to sneak in, right, and begin to affect life within the company itself. I think it's remarkable that it's taken this long, that it hasn't. For the most part, I think people go to work and they try not to talk about politics, especially in this country. But how long will that hold, right? There's this kind of intellectual dam that's been built that's holding back the red versus blue argument from coming into the office. But I think it's under a lot of pressure. And so how long till it breaks?
Yeah. Well, and the other point I was going to make is that it used to be that these companies kind of needed the market, right, to access funding, and they don't really need it anymore. Right? Technology. The other benefit of technology is not only light on assets, light on workforce, but also kind of the democratization, access to funding, right, and elimination of the middleman a bit, right. So and if you can raise money with people that think like you and do want to build a metaverse, then you don't need to be subject to the general public or the typical shareholder.
Look, and so much wealth has been concentrated in the hands of private individuals, right? That one of the things that isn't visible to, I think, the average person, but it's a remarkable phenomenon, is something called the family firm, right, or the family office. And so family offices are companies that invest the money of our family. There were probably a few of these around 20 years ago, right? Today they have a convention, right? I think here in DC, and you've got 100 plus to show up, right? These are quote unquote investment offices that have sometimes of them over 100 people working for them, investing the money of one family. So at that scale, what do you need the capital markets for, right? You hit up 2 or 3 family offices, you can probably do whatever you want with that kind of money. So I think that this privatization of capital, accumulation of wealth, right, in a couple of hundred families who can do what it took the market to do in 1960, is a huge change. And so the couple that, right, with the social pressure, regulatory pressure, the risk of being a public company, yeah, you could see why if you're a CEO, why wouldn't you prefer to be private? Of course, now that comes with its own issues, but um, I suppose a lot of them would just say, look, I'd rather deal with a smaller set of people, right, than this wider world where I don't control any of these factors.
So speaking of not caring what any of your shareholders or the public says, right? We have to talk about the stuff going on with our friend Elon Musk, because this week has been. I feel like I say this every week, but this week has been a especially insane week. Vanity Fair had an article called "Blue Check Havoc."
Right.
The Daily Mail was calling it the Great Twitter Exodus. What do you think of this whole meltdown that seems to be happening with the media in particular, Carlos? Right? I mean, there's just people that are looking at this saying, I'm done, I'm out, I'm not going to pay $8 a month to be verified by this blue check verification thing, and they're leaving the platform.
Well, the last Friday to me was a remarkable case study because you talk about digital leader and that scene of him carrying a sink, right, in the Twitter office, and then immediately firing half the company. And I tell you, I knew a very, very famous sort of business guru, right? And he had a really interesting way of giving advice. He would give advice in 2 parts. One was something that was immediately obvious. The other part was something that was impossible. And so something like, you must digitally transform your company, and tonight fire half your workforce. Well, the only person I've ever seen take that advice was Elon Musk, because I've never seen anybody fire, right, half a company. And then 2 days later, go, wait a minute, I might have made a mistake. Will some of you please come back, right? As a management paradigm, I find it remarkable. And we say, okay, why is the corporation in trouble? Maybe it's because the people who walk in the door of an acquisition, right, as a joke, carrying a sink, and then say, you know what? I think so little of the fact that people make their livelihoods, pay mortgages, right, have health care, that I'm going to make a big joke out of this, and I'm going to fire half the company. When have you seen that, Dan? Right, in your professional lifetime, that a CEO walks into a big time acquisition. It's not a 200-person company, right? It's a $54 billion acquisition, and then says half of you are fired tonight.
Yeah.
I've had a chance to think it over, know what you do, right? And so it was a completely ridiculous thing to do. Now, was it a joke, right? Is this a real management approach? There was an interesting article over the weekend about how part of this was done, right? The coders were asked to bring in your code, and they were code people, tech people from, I think, from Tesla, who were asked in to review the code and say, okay, this one's good, this one doesn't know what they're doing. And you were fired based on your code printout, by the way. You had to print out 30 days worth of coding work, right? And then somebody from Tesla looked at it and said, okay, this person is worth keeping, this person isn't worth keeping. That's crazy. So, but look, crazy made him the richest person in the world, I suppose. Is crazy going to fix Twitter? I don't think so, because Twitter isn't a regular company, right?
Yeah, I think I have a slightly different opinion. I think that, first of all, I think Elon's a lot smarter than people give him credit for. I don't think he's as,
but you can be smart and crazy. I never said he's dumb. I think the guy's brilliant. He's almost a genius. But that doesn't mean that you're operating under the normal rules of sanity, right? There are lots of crazy geniuses. I've met a lot of them.
yeah. So I think, I think that, whether you agree with his tactics or not, you bring up a good point around, hey, these are people's livelihoods, right? So maybe we shouldn't, make so many jokes about it, right? And I hear that, but I think, have I seen a head of a corporation do it? No, but I've seen Donald Trump do it, right? And regardless of how you feel politically, there's no arguing that he was a master marketer and persuader, and that the crazy factor played into his success. Daniel's asking us, Carlos, do we think the layoffs are really trimming the fat or taking things into a new direction? I think it's about showing people. First of all, there's a old expression, media expression, that all news is good news, right? I mean, he's getting an unbelievable amount of news and press, even more than Elon normally gets, right? And so I think there's some of that. I think that it's his way, his marketing campaign of big changes are in the works, and so watch out. So I'm a pretty big fan of Elon in general. I will say though that I think this blue check thing is a mistake. This whole idea of having to pay to be verified is really kind of dangerous, right? And I think it's a bad move, especially when so much of Twitter's following has been built on the backs of media outlets and journalists. It goes back to one of our favorite conversations, Carlos, of verification and where do facts come from, and to have something where you have to pay to be verified, in opposed to verifying that people are real in this world that we're in today, I think is a mistake.
Well, I want to go back to Daniel's question. I think it's neither. I think this is just his style, and he's done it at a smaller scale in other companies that he's managed before. And I think walking in and saying, I'm going to fire half the workforce of a $54 billion company is a statement that says, look, throw away whatever you thought, right, this company was going to be. There's a new boss in town. Now, there are other ways of doing that, right? And there's a right way and a wrong way of doing that. I don't think that, like I said, treating the livelihoods of all those people as some kind of joke, and then changing your mind 2 days later and saying you're unfired, right? It is in any way the right way to start tenure, right, of a company that is, and again, it's an unusual company, Twitter, right? It's not a normal company, and its role in society is not normal. It doesn't make tires for car, right? It is the social, right, town square, whether you like it or not, of this country. And so you would think somebody would say, look, I have a special responsibility to manage this transition well, not to turn it into a joke where I carry a kitchen sink into the office and laugh about it. So no, I look, the guy's track record speaks for itself, but I think he's kind of a jerk.
Yeah. And, I think, there's also something interesting here. We talk a lot about, Web3 in terms of the metaverse and NFTs and crypto and stuff like that. But one of the general themes of Web3, and I think where things are going, is more decentralization, right? Where you're not relying on platforms like Twitter or Facebook to be sort of the digital town squares. I think you're going to see more of that. I think that I don't know if this is part of Elon's calculation or not, but seeing the comments of a lot of the journalists in particular that have moved on to other platforms, I think is indicative of this. Although I will say it was really interesting that the CEO of Substack came out, which is a platform that is used by a lot of journalists. We actually use it for our research publication site here. He came out and said basically that Twitter's never going to completely go away. It'll be a source of links and to get the message out. But he kind of alluded to the same idea of, maybe it shouldn't be or won't be the place where people actually have the conversations.
Well, the reality of Twitter, and I studied Twitter for my new book, is that it isn't really a conversation, right? The way in which the Twitter algorithms reward accounts is by arguing, right? The best way to use Twitter is to pick a fight with somebody famous if you're not famous, and hopefully that person engages with you, which then makes you famous. Right. So, and one thing about Twitter is that I think the research says that 25% of the platform, or 20 something percent of the platform, are journalists, and 85% of all journalists are on Twitter. So there's a thing called the media logic, right? And the dominant media logic is really arguing. And that's why so much of what Twitter is are just fights. Now you could say that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I think the average person, if you go to Twitter, you're either going because you like a good fight, and journalists, because I started as one, love a good fight. We like a good debate, and then the other is maybe you're trying to get like the zeitgeist of something in the news or current events. But as far as informing or anything else, I don't think it really does that. I think there's a lot of social posturing on Twitter if you look at the tweets right carefully, and that's why I said it's a kind of a weird platform, because it doesn't really inform, right? It doesn't provide a social cohesion function of any kind. It is not news, other than sort of almost like the old wire, right? AP wire, or something just happened, it breaks on Twitter these days. But other than I think its only news function is really kind of that, right? It's a wire that something breaks there. You might get an initial reaction, but once that's over, the value just decreases tremendously in the conversations you see that typically ensue. It devolves quickly into what its natural state is, which is a place for people to scream at each other.
Yeah, I've always kind of felt that way, right? I've always felt like these platforms, and because I think as a marketer, I was taught to not rely on any single silver bullet or in this case single platform, but you have to be on those platforms. But I've always kind of was of the belief that you should use those platforms to kind of get the interest and then drive people to your platform, right? Or maybe in the case of journalists, a Substack or something similar, right? So maybe that's what it evolves to. The other issue is just the media business, commercially in general, where Musk is saying that they're gonna eliminate paywalls for people that pay premium subscriptions on Twitter. I don't see how that plays out, at least initially with the media companies, right? Because that's how they're making money, right? So how do you do that?
You go back to advertising. Advertisers, generally speaking, want to advertise in media that make the consumer feel good, right? We don't advertise on things that leave you feeling upset or angry. The ideal platforms are one in which your product is placed along in something which generates positive emotion. It's the reason why TikTok works well and Instagram has worked well as an advertising platform, why Twitter hasn't. Because I don't think the average person who spends 10 minutes on Twitter leaves it feeling better than they did when they jumped on, which is not the case, right? For the people who are following influencers on Instagram or on TikTok, they leave feeling inspired or happy or wanting to check more into a product, right? Twitter just doesn't have the same effect. Its media logic is completely different. Now, is he going to be able to change that? Because he says he wants to make this a preferred platform for advertisers. You can't do that unless you change the dominant logic of the platform, which means you've changed the platform. In order for Twitter to become what I think Musk wants it to be, it can't be Twitter today. It's got to be some other version of it.
I
Now,
agree, and I think that's why he's being so, he's planting these seeds in the media, which, again, I think it's a lot more calculated than a lot of people realize. Maybe the kitchen sink aside, but it was good. It was good publicity nonetheless. We all saw that picture, right? So if no news is bad news, then that was definitely an impactful image to see in a world full of images and clutter. But the other point I heard this morning, which is a really interesting one, I think it kind of dovetails off what you're saying, Carlos, which is that Twitter can't exist the way it is today. But I don't think Elon bought it to do that. I think he bought it to make it something bigger, right? So you look at what's happening, while the metaverse debate happens at Meta, at Facebook, Facebook's core business is in trouble. Seemingly, they're a mess. There's some talks about TikTok being banned in the U.S. due to security concerns, with China. And then in the midst of all of this, Elon Musk, hinted at Vine coming back. Remember Vine, right? So, and then you look at some other examples out there in other markets. In China, for example, you have WeChat, which is kind of all of these apps in one. It's TikTok, it's Twitter, it's e-commerce, it's kind of like the one central app that in theory we all would like, instead of having 47 apps on our phones. And so you wonder if that's maybe the bigger play here.
by the way, there's one other issue, and that is the people who aren't getting mentioned are Tesla shareholders. Because if I were a Tesla shareholder, I wouldn't be very happy, right? The company, to me, the window that Tesla had, right, back when it was a $1,200 stock, right, it's over. The competitors have caught up. The product is better. I mean, I follow the car industry very closely, and I think that those who thought that Tesla was going to dominate the industry were just wrong. Uh, VW, right, Daimler, the Americans, the product that they're putting out is as good, less money, in some cases better, if they want premium than what Tesla's put out. And so I would be asking hard questions about Tesla to, right, what do it's funny that you're carrying a sink, but what's happening, right, to this company? Because I think Tesla has issues. And so normally you would say, a board would come in and say, look, you need to focus on this company because the competition is now, it's really, really good, right? The product that's being put out against Tesla. And instead of doing that, you're going to go play around on social media. Okay. But this is the great test, right? If he does it, then he goes down in history as, right, maybe the greatest, most disruptive CEO ever. If he doesn't, then he loses Twitter, and Tesla could blow up too along the way because it wasn't being managed at a time of crisis. And I think Tesla right now is at a real turning point. But what does it do in response to the great product that's coming out from Europe and US? That's little by little taking its share.
Yeah, I have a sneaky suspicion that Elon Musk doesn't really care that much about Tesla.
Okay.
I don't. That's just
Hey, listen, if you're sitting with seven-figure Tesla holdings, like that's
I'm
enough.
with you. So to your question, I don't think. And I've never met him. I've never interviewed him, but I don't think Elon Musk cares about being the known as a good CEO necessarily. I think he looks at it. I think Elon Musk is his own company, his own brand, and I think that he's looking to do bigger things for the universe, whether it's right or wrong. That maybe makes him a bad investment from a stock market standpoint. But again, back to our earlier conversation, should that be the benchmark? Should that be the measuring stick? I think that he's got, I heard somebody say this morning that people get Tesla wrong. Tesla's not a car company. It's a battery company. I think it's even more than that. I don't think Tesla's a car company or a battery company. I think it's a innovation company. I think it was the foundation for Elon Musk to, build bigger things like spaceships and go to Mars and do what at least he thinks is a bigger picture thing.
Okay. Well, like I said, we'll see. It either becomes a crowning achievement, right? of a storied career, or it's the Peter principle at work, right? You do really well until you get the job that finally blows you up.
Yeah.
We'll see. Mhm.
Well, and the other issue that comes up though, as these, if he does make a move to, create an American version of WeChat, and all of a sudden your Tesla starts communicating with Twitter and what other apps that he, connects to it. The other issue, we always come back to becomes, security and user data, right? So you have this, this thing with, I think one of the other issues that Facebook has right now is, the WhatsApp thing becoming less and less of a, seemingly secure platform. How do you avoid, that from happening with, any company, whether it's Elon Musk's venture or the next thing, where so much data that used to be at least siloed into different companies and places is becoming more and more, integrated into one place.
I think the data thing, what we're lacking is visualization. I think this is a time bomb for digital leaders waiting to explode. And here's what I mean by that: that the average person, and even people who are, I won't say the average, even very tech savvy people, don't fully comprehend what the internet knows about them.
Right.
Okay. And because it's not possible to comprehend right now. And so I do believe that one of these days something will be created that will suddenly visualize for you all of your data, where it sits, who owns it, who knows what about you, right, in some way. And I think when that day comes, this issue is going to go crazy, because I just don't think that people, it's very hard to grasp, right, how much information is sitting out there about you, your digital footprint. And it's actually one of the articles in the DEI review was about our digital footprints, and it's about all the little markers we leave as we go through the web, right? And even things like almost buying something, every click that's being watched, every keystroke that's being watched. I think that we think of that these little breadcrumbs, they don't mean anything. I don't think that's the case at all. It's just that there's no way to see it right now. It's an invisible phenomenon. If suddenly tomorrow there's an app that comes out and it says this is who knows what about you, right? It somehow scans and says Facebook has this, Apple has that, right? Google has this, the IRS has whatever, and suddenly you see your entire world, right? Digital, all the kind of breadcrumbs become visible suddenly, then this issue will change overnight.
Yeah, I think that's why it hasn't happened, right? I think the tech companies don't want it to happen because people, I think you're right, people don't realize, how much information is out there, and they're afraid of this revolution from happening. But I also think that gets back into the public versus private companies, because if you really care about innovation and not just what your shareholders think next quarter, I think it's a conversation that we need to have, because I think the other part of it is true also, which is that people might be more willing to give up certain information if they understood what information it was versus it wasn't, and what the benefits were, right? There's this research that came out of Kellogg's, Northwestern, about, kind of trying to figure out, who should control user data, whether it's the business or the individual. And they the net is kind of both, depending on the application and what it is, where, if it's something like, a single use thing like a navigation app, where a user can, opt out or opt in, then, it's a little bit simpler. Just don't use it if you don't want it. But if it's more of a digital conglomerate like a Facebook or a Twitter or Google, you got to be more precise about what you're willing to share and what you're not willing to share. And I think that becomes something where, there's a generation of people in particular, I think that, maybe, they're just scared of what they don't know, because it's just this big scary thing where they don't feel like they're getting any real information or truth from the companies that they're dealing with.
like I think of it as, one of the things I always ask myself is, imagine in the 1950s that car makers had put coloring into CO2, right? And so the car exhaust put out like a purple streak,
Hmm.
and it turned the air into a different color. Would we have ever had global warming?
Right.
Just a thought.
Right.
One, but we didn't, right? Why? Because you don't see it. So the car looks clean, right? Unless it's something that's belching out smoke. The psychology was these vehicles are doing nothing. There's no issue here. By the way, great show on Netflix that talks about the history of the guy who sort of first figured this out, right? And there's this great graphic about how he said it's not my idea that it's too bad that it wasn't purple, because people would have seen what was coming out of the back of the car. I think this is the same thing happening here. It's an invisible effect that all our information is being captured by all these different systems. It is impossible for us to comprehend just the scale of it. But a very smart person, maybe Elon, will come along and create an app that will say, "This is your digital X-ray or your digital MRI, right, or whatever it is." Right? Imagine that you could just put in a website and it would tell you everything that website is holding about you.
Yeah.
That's game
Yeah.
changing, right?
Yeah.
And that, to me, if you talk about Silicon Valley solving a problem, how about not making another app for people to dance to, and making an app that I can put in, that I can go to a website, and the moment I go to the website, it says this website has nothing about you, or it knows this, whether it's your birthday, your social security number, the last time you bought something, right? And it's a Chrome attachment that would tells you when you land on a site what's being visual, like almost like a ticker, right? What's being captured about you as you move to the site, and what it has, and then gives you the option to delete it all before you leave the site.
The question is, will that be a public company? I would argue that it'll never be a public company that would come up with that. It won't
I
be financially beneficial.
I tell you who's the first. If it does happen, and it is a public company, I tell you who'll do it. It's going to be Apple. I
They're
think
moving that way, right? They seem like they're going against the headwinds of, and even that WhatsApp example that I mentioned. Part of the reason that came out is because Apple put their foot down and said, "No,
right.
you have to disclose that," right?
I think that it's very possible that within 10 years you see it in Safari, that there is a visual tracker on any site you visit that tells you what it's grabbing about you, and gives the option, which is the next step. Right now they have do not track on the phone. Okay, that's great. The next logical step is to say, show me, right, what that looks like. And so you're probably right, but if it is a public company, it'll be our friends at Apple, because I think Apple takes this seriously in a way that almost no one else does.
Yeah, I mean, even in the last few months, they've really revolutionized email in the sense, also for the same reasons. Right now,
Yeah.
now you can't track whether somebody on an Apple device, well, an Apple app, I think,
Yeah.
is opening the email, right?
Yeah, and I think they've made a really clear stake in a way that the way Zuckerberg has done publicly with Metaverse. I think Apple, and this is more because it's Cook's way, right? If you read the company carefully, they've made an even bolder claim to privacy, and I think that they're the benchmark in this world.
Carlos, any final words? Any other topics from this week's headlines?
Well, look, I think the last thing I'll mention is that this article The Economist had about how we've missed 1.5C for global warming, and now the best chance is 2, was really interesting, because it just lays out the scale of the problem, right? That it isn't anything that we now don't know. We understand it, and that it is a remarkable leadership challenge for us as a society, right, to act collectively to solve this problem. And we've all watched the headlines, right? It's hurricanes in Canada. There's nobody safe from this issue. It's coming. We've got the first already. We've had climate refugees. We're going to start getting them in the U.S., I think, within the next 5 years, as migration patterns change in the U.S. because of climate. And I don't see it as a headline issue. It was not discussed at all during the midterms, right? And yet it is the single biggest issue we have. And if you've got kids, that you would worry about the most. So yeah, I still think that's one that it's waiting for the right leadership to step forward and somehow bring this issue home to us.
Yeah.
It hasn't happened. Mm-hmm. Well, out of time again, Dan. There's always so much to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Carlos, thanks as always. And, for anybody watching, we're not just here talking to ourselves all the time. We've launched a research practice with Digital Enterprise Institute. It's powered by our network of 130,000 global executives, subject matter experts, and academic leaders. So if there's anything that you're working on, anything that you're curious about, check us out at DEInetwork.com. And if you want to see some more, more of this research, Carlos, as you can tell, puts a lot of time and effort into putting these things together each week. Check out our publication at DEIresearch.com. Check us out each week, Wednesdays at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific, 6 Central European time. And in the meantime, have a great week, everybody. Thanks, Carlos.
See you next week, Dan.